So I was talking to a number of influential Democrats this week about Antifa and about January 6th. Okay. And so imagine that an outside observer like a Canadian might look at the United States and think, well, the radical left has Portland and Minneapolis, and that's pretty damn ugly. And then the radical right has January 6th, and that's pretty ugly. And, maybe you could draw some kind of equivalency between the two, and maybe not, but I think you could at least make a reasonable initial case for something like that. January 6th had a lot of symbolic weight, if nothing else, and certainly did frighten people very badly. But when I was talking to these Democrats about Antifa and the riots, their attitude is sort of, well, there's always been riots and race riots in the United States throughout its entire history. So in some sense, it's really nothing out of the ordinary. And besides, Antifa doesn't really exist. And so I'd like you to address, if you would, both of those points. And I should point out, too, these were reasonable people making these points. These aren't radical leftists. These are people who are trying hard to pull the Democratic Party towards a moderate center and who are very suspicious of the radical leftists, especially the grip they have on the education system. So they're good faith players and still. And the other thing they said to me was that they believed it was intellectually dishonest to draw a parallel between Portland and Minneapolis and January 6th, making the case that what happened on January 6th was much, much worse, like in a category of its own. And they justified that by referring to the fact that it was a direct assault on the Capitol building, and that there was presidential ambivalence about bringing that to a halt. So that's a rat's nest. So, you want to wade in?
Yes, Professor. So I think, let's say for good faith engagement from the left, I completely understand why there would be this perception that Antifa is a myth or doesn't really exist, because that's the propaganda that the public is fed from the legacy media and broadcast and in print, day in and day out, certainly since Trump was elected. It's an entirely different story, though, when you are on the ground, as I have been for years, and you see that militancy face to face. And when you see it, the organization or aspect of it is undeniable. That's what initially sparked my curiosity, because in Portland, where I'm from, when the election results in 2016, November, were announced, tens of thousands of people took to the streets. And within that, there was an organized element of people dressed in the same uniforms. At that time, it was unusual to cover your face, and they had weapons in a very strategic way. Smash and move on, cars, businesses, buildings, start fires, run. So it was from there that sparked my interest in wanting to learn more about what looks like an organized militia or paramilitary. So with that out of the way, though, I think the press, because of its compromised nature and generally being biased to the left, they have turned a blind eye to the evidence that shows that depending on where you are, there's an organizational structure to Antifa. And the statement that Biden said infamously at one of the debates last year, Antifa is an idea, that statement in itself is true, but it's not the complete statement. You have, I think, one way to explain it that people can understand perhaps more easily is it's analogous to the worldwide jihadist phenomenon, in that you can have people who are actual members of organizations like Boko Haram or IS or Al Qaeda or any of these other jihadist groups. But you have people as well who are sympathetic to the ideology and act on it. And in that regard, I think you can think of the contemporary manifestations of Antifa in the United States, Canada, and in Western countries along the same lines. You can have people who self-identify in, and simply all they do is go to these protests or riots based on flyers they see online. Then you have actual cells that operate, such as Rose City Antifa, which is an organized group. You can go on their website and look at the Q&A, and they actually have one of the questions is, how do I join? And they said that currently membership is closed. So there's that. And in my book, I published some of the primary documents of the curriculum from Rose City Antifa, which is actually one of the cells that's part of a network called the Torch Antifa Network, and they have cells in other cities. So it's kind of all of the above. It's ideology, it's horizontally organized, it's disorganized, it's also highly organized in some cases. So it's because of that lack of centralized hierarchical authority that makes it easy for those who want to obfuscate and confuse the public about it, because they can point and say, well, there's no single leader. Who's the leadership? Show me the leadership. And because there is no single person who's heading everything, then the response is, well, that's evidence that they don't exist. To counter
okay,
that.
So this is a real problem conceptually, right? I mean, and let's think about it to begin with as a problem that we all face instead of a political problem emanating either from the left or the right. Okay, because I think there's a deeper problem here that isn't exactly partisan. And we'll get into the partisan element of it later.
As a spouse, a parent, or a leader, people count on you. But if you're constantly tired, unfocused, and just not feeling like yourself, how can you show up the way they need you to? That's where Merrick Health comes in. Merrick is a premier health optimization platform that uses comprehensive lab work, not guesswork, to uncover what's really going on in your body. Hormones, thyroid inflammation, nutrient levels, the markers that matter. Their expert clinical teams build a personalized, research-backed plan just for you, whether it's lifestyle changes, supplements, or prescription treatments. When you know what's going on inside, you can leave with clarity, show up with energy, and stay sharp for your family, your team, and yourself. Head over to merrickhealth.com and use code Peterson for 10% off to join their guided optimization program with your personal medical team. That's merrickhealth.com, code Peterson. Stop guessing, start leading, and start with Merrick Health.
So imagine, first of all, I assume that the description you gave would be the one that you gave, is that, okay, so what we have here is we have some actual organizations. Let's focus on Rose City Antifa. But it's a radically distributed organization. And we don't even know how radically distributed. And it's almost impossible to identify its core members or even to define what core membership might be. Now, you did point to Rose City Antifa, but if I said, for example, well, how many other Antifa groups are there that have an identifiable organizational strategy that's akin to Rose City Antifa? How many do you have any sense of that?
Just a few dozen. There aren't very many, but the thing is, they close and then they spring up as new ad hoc groups under different names, but it's really the same, relatively the same people involved.
Okay, a few dozen. So that's real interesting. So that's like, let's say 24. Just let's make this concrete because I think it'll be interesting to do so. So in that 24, how many people do you think are core involved in each group? Do you think it's like 5? Is it 3? Is it 10? Like real hardcore people who are devoting their time to this, like maybe they're unemployed. That would be a real shock. And it's their full-time job, something like that. How many people?
Across the entirety of the United States, if most of them, let's say, were averaging around the same size as Rose City Antifa, then I would say in total, we're looking at below 1,000 people in across the entire United States. So hundreds, which is, in the scheme of things and for the scale, that's a very small number.
Yeah, well, it's so small that you could say that it's, and I'm not saying this, but it's so small that you could say that it's non-existent, right? Because it's 1 in 300,000 if it's the US. It's such a tiny minority of people that they barely exist. But what that points to is something actually, that minimizing it in that manner actually points to something far more sinister. Because what it means is that under 1,000 committed people can radically destabilize whole cities and pose a threat to the integrity of entire culture, not least by fostering polarization and the degeneration of the political scheme that comes along with that. And so that's a real danger for all of us, particularly if it's the case that groups like that can multiply their power by pulling other semi-attached and maybe not so violent or even extremist people in on the basis of their empathy.
Exactly. concentric circles probably is a good way to explain it. What you asked me, the concrete number of how many people are actually core in terms of involved in the organizing, the planning, attending meetings or trainings, like as you said, almost non-existent given the population size of the U.S. However, the larger concentric circle is of their sympathizers, and I think the role of the press, since particularly, I would say since the election of Trump, helped really to mainstream the so-called Antifa ideology. It put day in and day out for the entire world that this belief that America had elected a fascist president under Trump, that we were experiencing a regime change, that there would be genocide, and on the face, I mean, these accusations are so outrageous and I would say laughable, but people genuinely believed it. You know, go back 5 years, remember, like this sense
I
of
believe.